All right, part three of Islamic world and Africa. We're going to get into the West African kingdoms. All right, so anthropologists believe humanity first arose in East Africa, which we talked about earlier in the Great Rift Valley. There's a good map of it right here. And in ancient times, the rise of the Egyptian civilizations affected the African cultures along the Upper Nile. And the two kingdoms were Kush and Axium, which are here. Kush is kind of surrounding Egypt, and then here's Axium. And these are two groups that kind of really influenced Africa at the time. So Kush was an early iron-producing center, which grew rich from selling iron wares, ivory, ebony, wood, and slaves. Later, the kingdom of Ethiopia in East Africa adopted Christianity, its own form of Christianity in Ethiopia. So again, which we learned in that first chapter, East Africa, the Great Rift Valley, and then kind of spread throughout, eventually ends up in the Americas and Australia and places like that. So here's a good picture of the Egyptians, which is kind of in the orange area here. And then the kingdom of Kush was also pretty much in the same area. All right, so the main point for the West African kingdoms is the gold for salt trade. So in Africa, you have savannas, and you have this dry Sahara desert, which is mainly most of North Africa, which you see here on the map. Just below this is a wide band of grassland with some trees known as the savanna. So this is kind of what the savanna looks like here. Not enough rain to get forests, but you have just enough to have kind of a scattering of trees. So the savanna stretched across almost the entire width of Africa, which you see here, going all the way across Africa. So from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean, it was home to large numbers of pastoral people who raised cattle and sheep. That's what a pastoral person is. So these people also learned to smelt iron and grow crops, and had complex communities with craftspersons, people who did crafts, warriors, and traders. And the Sahara Desert. So the Sahara Desert is really kind of a barrier and really kind of changes cultures from North Africa to the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. So below the savanna, you have tropical rainforest of equatorial Africa. So around the equator is your rainforest. The Sahara Desert acted as a barrier that separated the people of sub-Saharan Africa from the Mediterranean world. So not only they separated North Africa, so the desert separates really the Mediterranean world, Europe, and everything else from the rest of Africa. Despite the separation, trade across the Sahara was never completely cut off. The Sahara contains oases with underground springs that supply fresh water. Because the camels were able to go several days without waters, merchants could cross the desert as long as they knew where these oases were located at. So by the 7th century, Muslim merchants from the Mediterranean were making this challenging journey. So here's the desert. What you had is Muslim Arab traders would actually come in and cross the desert with the help of the different tribes that were there, knowing where the oasis, where the water supply was. So these merchants were especially motivated across the Sahara Desert because of the gold and other riches they could obtain from trade with West Africa. At the same time, part of West Africa had no salt. So, and salt was used pretty much for everything back then. So merchants moving in camel caravans across the desert picked up large blocks of salt in Africa on their way to West Africa, and once they got to West Africa, they would exchange the salt for gold. So a thriving trade developed based on the gold for salt trade. Ideas were exchanged. This is how the Islamic belief, so just like how Buddhism spread through the Silk Road, this is how the Islamic religion is going to spread into different parts of Africa. And here's a picture of the caravan, and these are actually blocks of salt right here. Here's an oasis, and you had to know where they were, or you're going to die in the desert. So here's the actual trade. A lot of these guys, Arabs, would come in and they'd take the long trip around, or they would come down from North Africa and then come down and the main city that's going to be the trade center is going to be Timbuktu. So the rise of African kingdoms around the 5th century, West Africa saw the rise of a series of powerful kingdoms based on their control of trade routes. So 3 groups we're going to talk about, Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, where they got their power from is controlling the trade routes. And they had cavalries, which is an army on horseback or camelback, could be either one. For the next 1,000 years, their civilizations dominated West Africa, leading to the exchange of ideas, the rise of cities, and the increase of wealth. And here's Timbuktu right here. So Kingdom of Ghana is the first of the West African kingdoms. Kingdom of Ghana was founded in 750 between the Senegal and Niger rivers. And they use iron swords, spears, and lances. They gained control over West Africa's trade routes, so that's why they become wealthy. Caravans brought salt south into Ghana and then returned north with gold from the forest areas around Ghana. So the power of the kings of Ghana rested in their ability to tax all trade passing in and out of their region, especially the gold and salt trade. So with these revenues, they were able to raise a large army with a large cavalry. The rulers of Ghana appointed nobles to govern their provinces in return for paying taxes to the central government. So it's a type of feudalism. So the system similar to European feudalism, like I said. So rulers and nobles were further enriched by using captives of war as slaves. So this is kind of the start of the slave. Well, it's been going on for a long time. This is when it starts to build up. So in 1076, the Ghanaians were invaded by a Muslim group coming in from North Africa. And this is when Islam starts to creep into West Africa. Ghana never fully recovered from the invasion and eventually dissolved into several smaller states and then breaks up like we've talked about with other empires. All right, the next one is the Kingdom of Mali. What makes them important is they're the wealthiest of the 3 West African kingdoms. So in 1240, Mali conquered the old capital of Ghana and established a new empire. Their rulers brought both of the trade under their control. So they took over the gold and the salt mines. So Mali's rulers converted to Islam, although most of their people did not adopt Islam. So they stayed animist, believed in the different nature gods and things like that. So leaders become Islamic and the people actually follow their traditional religious beliefs. All right, and this is when you have one of the most famous rulers of all times is Mansa Musa, and he expanded the kingdom. He made a religious pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, so he completely converts to Islam. And what he did is he brought scholars back to teach the nobles about Islam. He commissioned a palace and a great mosque to be built in Timbuktu, which is the one I keep showing you the pictures of, and a thriving trading center on the Niger River. He also had, this is when Muslim scholarship flourishes in the area, and Timbuktu became an important center of several universities and attracted students from Europe, Asia, and Africa. So because of the importance of studying the Quran, many of his subjects learned to read. So this is an emperor who actually went out and tried to teach people how to read and write. So later rulers of Mali proved to be less capable. We've heard this in a lot of the empires that we've talked about. They weren't as good as Mansa Musa, and the empire collapses in the 1400s. So what is so amazing about Mansa Musa is when you think about the wealthiest people in the world, you think about Bill Walton, who owned Walmart, Warren Buffett, and Bill Gates. However, if you go back further in history, you discover the wealth of the kings and queens and rulers of yesteryear trumps the bank accounts of even the guys that are around today that we think of as unbelievably wealthy. So during this time, one man controlled more wealth than Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, and the wealthiest members of the Walton family all combined. So Mansa Musa the first today would be approximately worth $400 billion. So he's supposedly the wealthiest person to ever live on Earth. And then the last one, Songhai Empire, what makes them important is that they're the largest of the 3 West African. So in 1464, Sultan Sunni Ali, ruler of the Songhai people, they go in and capture the main city again, Timbuktu, which is now the third time it's been taken over by a different group. And they bring the Upper Niger under his control. And it becomes the largest of the West African three trading kingdoms. So it grew rich from the same thing, the trade across the Sahara Desert. And it actually expanded the trading networks all the way to Europe and Asia. Established an elaborate system of taxation and communication. Despite its riches and powers, the kingdom of Songhai only lasted 130 years. What had happened is a group from Morocco, seeing how wealthy these groups were becoming, comes in, invades. And although the Songhai army was larger, the Moroccans had gunpowder, so they had gotten that from their European traders. So the gunpowder and muskets defeated the Songhai, who fought with only arrows and spears. The fall of Songhai marked the end of the last of the great West African kingdoms. Here's a picture of a mosque built during that time. And here is when, after the city had been abandoned for a long time, this is what the Europeans saw when they came in. A lot of the Timbuktu is actually covered in sand and things like that. And here's the famous mosque in Timbuktu. So other African kingdoms were around at that time. You can see on the map. So Efi and Benin, these kingdoms developed in the rainforest area. So right in here. They became famous for copper and bronze sculptures, which were among the finest of all African artwork. By the 16th century, Benin became involved in the slave trade. This is where most of the slave trade is going to happen, right here along this, what they called Ivory Coast. So it traded captured persons from other tribes in exchange for new European guns and iron, which they could go out and get more slaves. Zimbabwe, which is down here in the south, it's one of the best known of the African trading kingdoms. The existence of gold deposits, which they still have today, near Zimbabwe was crucial to its rise. It traded gold, copper, ivory from Africa's interior with your Muslim traders along the East African coast, so on the other side. And then you had all these different cities along the eastern coast that could actually trade with the Arab empires. So the coastal cities along East Africa, along the east coast of Africa, a number of independent city-states arose in the 10th century, and really they centered around gold from the interior of Africa. It was sent down the Zambia River into these cities where they sold to merchants of Arabia and India. So Ghana, remember, it's the first of the West African kingdoms. Mali had Mansa Musa, it's the wealthiest of the African kingdoms, and Songhai is the largest of the African kingdoms. So, chapter summary: Muhammad founded Islam on the Arabian Peninsula in the 7th century, and the Quran is the sacred book of Islam. It records the teaching of Muhammad. Muslims follow the 5 pillars, which is faith in one God, prayer 5 times a day, charity 2.5%, fasting, which is Ramadan, and making a pilgrimage to Mecca. Islam rapidly spread through the Middle East, North Africa, and Spain. Islamic culture flourished under the caliphates, and Islamic scholars made important contributions in mathematics, science, and architecture. Your Islamic culture was kind of the high point in the world at that time. So the gold salt trade exchanged salt from the Sahara Desert with the gold found in West Africa. The gold for salt trade encouraged the growth of a series of prosperous kingdoms, including Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. Other civilizations also flourished in Africa, including Efi, Benin, Zimbabwe, Ethiopia, and the cities of East Africa. So the use of captives and slaves, a practice common in the ancient world, encouraged later development of the slave trade.